They say the moment you realize you're worthless is the moment you become it. For Susan Fraser, that moment arrived on a night when autumn rain turned to ice, and her father's desperate eyes finally settled on her. Not as his daughter, but as payment. Because in her world, a woman's worth was measured in the children she could bear. And Susan? The healers had declared her barren at 16, which meant in the eyes of her pack, her family, even herself, she was worth absolutely nothing. Until the night she discovered that sometimes, being sold is just the beginning of finding out what you're truly made of. The tax collector's eyes gleamed like molten amber in the firelight of their cottage, golden, predatory, utterly without mercy. Before we continue, please support us and hit the subscribe button, and motivates us create more powerful stories. Now, let's dive in. Susan stood frozen in the doorway to the kitchen, watching as the massive beta wolf, still in human form but radiating dominance, towered over her father in their small front room. Her mother clutched Susan's younger sister, Lillian, behind her skirts. The girl was only 14, trembling. Still innocent enough to believe their father would protect them. Susan knew better. "The taxes have tripled this season," the beta announced, his voice like gravel scraping stone. "By order of Alpha King Sebastian Ross himself. The blood moon tithe is due. You will pay, or you will provide." His gaze swept the room, cold and calculating, landing first on Lillian, then sliding, slowly, deliberately, to Susan. She felt his assessment like a physical touch. Disgust crawled up her spine. "Perhaps," the beta said softly, dangerously, "the king will accept something else in exchange." Susan's heart stopped. No, no, please, not Lillian. But when her father opened his mouth, the name that fell from his lips wasn't her sister's. "Take Susan." Her mother gasped, but she didn't speak. And Susan? She simply stood there, feeling the floor drop out from beneath her, as her father continued, his voice hollow, rehearsed, as if he'd been planning this for weeks. "She's barren," he said, the words clipped and efficient. "The healers confirmed it years ago, after the fever. No mate will have her. No pack will claim her. She's of no use here." He swallowed hard, but his gaze never met hers. "But she's strong, obedient. She can work. She can serve." The beta tilted his head, considering. "The king has no need for broken wolves." "She's not broken," her father said quickly. Too quickly. "She's just incomplete. But she has other uses. She can read, write, keep records. She even knows the old healing songs, the ones passed down from her mother's line." Susan's throat tightened. He was selling her strengths now, listing her like livestock. "She won't cause trouble," her father added desperately. "And she'll never ask for anything. No mate, no cubs, no future. She'll serve the king until her last breath and be grateful for it." Grateful. The beta studied her for a long, agonizing moment. His nostrils flared slightly, as if scenting her weakness, her shame. Then finally, he nodded. "Very well, the barren one will suffice." He gestured toward the door. "Bind her hands. We leave at dawn." Her father exhaled in relief, his shoulders sagging. Her mother turned away, pulling Lillian closer. Lillian sobbed quietly into her hands, but she didn't run to Susan, didn't fight for her, didn't even whisper goodbye. "And Susan?" She lifted her chin, swallowed the scream building in her chest, and walked toward the beta with steady steps. As the rope bit into her wrists, tight and unforgiving, the fibers rough against her skin, she glanced back one last time. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Her mother was already comforting Lillian, stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. And in that moment, Susan understood with painful clarity. She had never been their daughter, not really. She had always been a debt waiting to be paid, a burden waiting to be lifted, a problem finally, mercifully, solved. "I hope," she said quietly, her voice cold and clear as winter frost, that your survival was worth your daughter's life. Her father flinched, but he still didn't look at her. Then she turned, and she didn't look back again. The beta dragged her outside into the rain. It fell in freezing sheets, soaking through her thin dress within moments, plastering the fabric to her skin. "Get in," he ordered, shoving her toward the back. Susan climbed in, her bound hands making it clumsy, painful. The wagon was empty except for a coil of rope and a dark, heavy blanket that smelled of mildew and something else. Something metallic. Blood, maybe. She curled into the corner, pulling her knees to her chest, and tried not to think about what awaited her at the Iron Fortress. Tried not to imagine the rumors she'd heard whispered in the village markets. Stories of the Alpha King's cruelty, his rage, the women who'd disappeared into his castle and never returned. "He's more beast than man," they said, "more monster than wolf. His fury once shattered kingdoms. His curse has killed every woman who's tried to warm his bed." Susan shivered, but not from the cold. The beta climbed onto the driver's seat, and the wagon lurched forward. Through the rain-streaked canvas cover, Susan caught glimpses of her village fading into the mist. The cottage where she'd grown up. The market square where she'd once laughed with friends who'd abandoned her after her diagnosis. The healer's hut, where she'd received the news that had shattered her life. Barren, cursed, worthless. The words had followed her ever since. Whispered behind cupped hands. Shouted by her ex-fiancé when he'd broken their engagement. Spoken with bitter resignation by her own mother. And now she was being sold to a king who supposedly couldn't touch a woman without killing her. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. As the wagon rolled through the night, the rain slowly turned to sleet, then to ice. Susan's teeth chattered. Her fingers went numb, but she refused to cry, refused to break. Instead, she did what she'd always done when the pain became too much. She told herself a story. Once upon a time, she thought, staring up at the dark canvas overhead. Once upon. So when the girl was sold to the Monster King, she didn't go to him in fear. She went to him in fury. And she discovered that monsters, sometimes, are just lonely men, waiting for someone brave enough to see them. It was a foolish story, a childish hope, but it was hers, and right now, it was all she had. Dawn broke slowly, reluctantly, as if even the sun was afraid of what awaited them. When the wagon finally stopped, Susan's entire body ached from the cold and the cramped position. The beta yanked the canvas aside, flooding the space with pale grey light. "Out," he commanded. Susan stumbled out, her legs barely holding her. And then, she saw it. The Iron Dominion. It rose from the earth, like something born of nightmares and dark magic. Obsidian towers clawing at the storm-heavy sky. Walls so black, they seemed to devour the light around them. And yet, as the weak sunlight touched the fortress, the entire structure gleamed with an otherworldly beauty, dark and deadly, like a blade forged from shadows and starlight. Susan's breath caught. It was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen, and somehow, the most beautiful. "Move," the beta growled, shoving her forward. They didn't approach the main gates, where guards in black armor stood like statues. Those gates were for nobles, for important wolves, for people who mattered. Instead, the beta led her around the outer wall to a narrow, almost invisible staircase that descended into shadow. A servant's entrance, hidden beneath tangled dead ivy and years of neglect. Down they went, down into cold, down into darkness, down into a place where the sun never reached and hope went to die. When they finally stopped, Susan found herself in a vast underground chamber. Stone walls glistened with moisture. Iron bars lined one side. Torches flickered in sconces, casting dancing shadows that looked almost alive. And the smell, fear, sweat, despair. 6 other women huddled together against the far wall, all of them young, all of them beautiful in that fresh, untouched way that made Susan's stomach turn, because she knew exactly why they were here, what they were meant for. The women's eyes darted to Susan, taking her in. Muddy, soaked, wrists bound, hair plastered to her face like a drowned thing. and then looked away quickly, as if acknowledging her existence would make their own fate more real. Susan straightened her spine. She wouldn't cower, wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Strip. The command cracked through the chamber like a whip. Susan's head snapped up. A woman stood in the doorway, tall and severe, with silver threading through her dark hair. Her eyes glowed amber in the torchlight. Wolf eyes, cold, merciless. She wore the black uniform of the king's household, with silver embroidery at the collar that marked her as someone of rank, someone with power. "I said strip," the woman repeated, her voice sharp as a blade. "All of you. Everything. Now, or I'll have the guards do it for you. And trust me, you won't enjoy that." One of the girls whimpered. Another started crying softly. Susan's hands trembled as she reached for the ties of her dress. Humiliation burned through her chest, hot and acidic, but she forced herself to move, to obey, survive first, fight later, as the soaked fabric fell away, leaving her exposed and shivering in the freezing air. The woman began to circle them slowly, inspecting them, judging them like livestock at market. She commented on each girl. Too thin, too soft, too timid. One by one, she picked them apart with cold efficiency. When she reached Susan, she paused. Her eyes narrowed. "This one." She gestured to a guard. The beta said she was barren. "Yes, Mistress Teresa," the guard confirmed. "Useless for breeding, but apparently she can read, write, knows some healing songs." Mistress Teresa's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "How quaint." She leaned in close, so close that Susan could smell lavender and something darker underneath. Power, maybe, or cruelty. "Tell me, girl, can you keep your mouth shut?" Susan met her gaze steadily. "Yes." "Can you follow orders without question?" "Yes." "Can you endure pain without screaming?" Susan's jaw tightened. "I've endured worse than you can imagine." For a moment, something flickered in Mistress Teresa's eyes. Surprise? Respect? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "We'll see about that." She straightened, addressing all of them now. "Listen carefully, because I'll only say this once. You belong to the Alpha King now. Your old lives are over. Your families are gone. Your names mean nothing. You will serve when called. You will obey without question. And you will never, ever, speak of what you see within these walls." She paused, letting the words sink in. "The king is not like other alphas. He is not kind. He is not gentle. And he is not forgiving. Cross him, and you'll wish the beta had left you to starve." Her gaze swept over them, cold and final. "Is that understood?" "Yes, mistress," the girls whispered in unison. "Good." Mistress Teresa turned toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, one more thing." She glanced back, her expression unreadable. "The king will see you at moonrise. I suggest you pray that he's in a merciful mood." Then she was gone, the heavy door slamming shut behind her, with a sound like a tomb sealing closed. In the sudden silence, one of the girls burst into tears. Another started rocking back and forth, arms wrapped around herself. A third simply stared at the wall, her eyes empty. Susan sank to the cold stone floor, pulling the thin, rough blanket they'd been given around her naked shoulders. Her body ached. Her heart ached. Everything hurt. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the shame and the bone-deep exhaustion, a spark flickered. "They think I'm broken," she thought, staring at the torchlight dancing on the wet stone walls. "They think I'm worthless. They think I'm nothing. But they're wrong, because nothing has nothing left to lose, and nothing can become anything." As the hours crawled by, and moonrise drew closer, Susan closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would endure. And somehow, some way, she would prove to every single person who'd ever called her worthless that they had never known her at all. Moonrise came too quickly. The heavy door groaned open, and Mistress Teresa returned with 2 guards flanking her. Her gaze swept over the huddled women, cold and assessing, before landing on Susan. "You," she said, her voice sharp. "The barren one. On your feet." Susan's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled, weak from cold and fear, but she kept her chin high. kept her expression blank. Survive first, fight later. The guards moved forward, unlocking the shackles from her wrists. The rope had left deep red marks in her skin, raw and burning. But Susan barely felt it. All she could feel was the weight of what was coming. "The king will see you now," Mistress Teresa said, her tone almost curious, as if she were wondering how long Susan would last. "Follow me, and for your sake, girl, do not speak unless spoken to." They led her out of the underground chamber, up narrow stone stairs that seemed to climb forever. With each step, the air grew warmer, less suffocating. Torchlight flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. Susan's bare feet made no sound on the cold stone. She was still wearing only the thin shift they'd given her after stripping her. It barely covered her, leaving her exposed, vulnerable, exactly as they intended. They want me afraid. They want me broken. But Susan had been broken before, and she'd survived. Finally, they emerged into a vast corridor. The walls here were different. Polished obsidian that gleamed like black glass, reflecting torchlight in 1,000 fractured pieces. Tapestries hung between the torches, scenes of battles, of wolves running beneath blood-red moons, of a crown forged in fire. Everything about this place screamed power, dominance, control. And then, the guards stopped before two massive doors carved with intricate wolf designs. The Alpha King's throne room. Mistress Teresa turned to her, her expression unreadable. "Remember what I told you. Do not speak. Do not look him in the eye, unless he demands it. And whatever you do—" She paused, something almost like warning flickering in her gaze. "Do not show fear. He can smell it, and it only makes things worse." Before Susan could respond, the doors swung open. The throne room stole her breath. It was massive, cathedral-like, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing light across the obsidian floors. But it was the moonlight streaming through tall, arched windows that dominated the space, silver and cold, painting everything in shades of grey and white. And there, at the far end of the room, upon a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, sat the Alpha King, Sebastian Ross. Even from a distance, his presence hit her like a physical force. He was tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes, golden eyes that gleamed in the torchlight like molten fire. He didn't move as she entered, didn't acknowledge her. He simply sat there, utterly still, radiating a kind of coiled power that made the air itself feel heavy. Several advisors flanked the throne, all of them older wolves in fine clothing. They whispered among themselves, their eyes sliding toward Susan with barely concealed disdain. "The infertile one of them muttered, just loud enough to carry. Brought for the king's amusement." Another snickered quietly. Susan's jaw tightened, but she kept walking, kept her head high. Let them mock, let them whisper. She'd heard worse. Mistress Teresa stopped 10 paces from the throne and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I present the final payment from the Fraser family, as requested." Sebastian's gaze finally moved, slowly, deliberately, from Mistress Teresa to Susan. And the moment their eyes met, something shifted. Time seemed to slow. The air crackled with sudden tension, and deep in Susan's chest, something stirred, something wild and primal that she didn't understand. A pull, a recognition. What? Sebastian's expression didn't change, but she saw it. The slight widening of his eyes, the way his hands tightened on the arms of his throne, the way his entire body went rigid, as if fighting against something invisible. His wolf, she realized with sudden clarity. His wolf is reacting to me. But before she could process what that meant, Sebastian's face went cold again. Stoic, unreadable. The moment vanished, as if it had never been. One of his advisors leaned close, whispering, "Your Majesty, she's the one you sent for." Sebastian stood, the movement fluid and predatory. He was even more imposing on his feet, towering over everyone in the room. His presence filled the space, commanding and absolute. "Leave her," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel and smoke. The advisors exchanged glances. "Your Majesty, perhaps." I said, "Leave her." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. "All of you, out." Mistress Teresa bowed again and retreated quickly. The advisors followed, though several cast backward glances, curiosity and concern warring on their faces. And then, the doors closed with a heavy, final thud, leaving Susan alone with the Alpha King. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Susan's heart pounded so hard she was certain he could hear it, certain his wolf could smell the fear she was trying so desperately to hide. Sebastian descended the steps from his throne slowly, each footfall deliberate, echoing through the vast chamber. He circled her, studying her, and Susan forced herself to stand still, to not flinch, to not run. "You don't fear me," he said at last, stopping directly in front of her. His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. Susan lifted her gaze to meet his, and despite every instinct screaming at her to look away, to submit, to bow, she held his stare. "Should I?" she asked softly. Something flickered in his golden eyes. Surprise? Amusement? It vanished too quickly to tell. His lips curved, just slightly. Not quite a smile, more like a warning. Everyone should. He stepped closer, so close that his scent surrounded her. Pine and smoke, and something darker, more primal. Dominance, power, and underneath it all, loneliness. Susan's breath hitched. "You're Susan Fraser," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "Daughter of a Beta family, declared baron at 16, sold by your father to settle his debts." He paused. "Do I have that right?" Her throat tightened. "Yes. And you came here willingly." "Did I have a choice?" "No." His honesty was brutal. "But you walked through those doors with your head high. Most women would have been dragged." "Most women," Susan said quietly, "have something left to lose." Something shifted in his expression. Something almost like understanding. He studied her for another long moment, his gaze intense, searching. Then he stepped back, creating distance between them, as if proximity itself were dangerous. "You belong to me now, Susan Fraser," he said, his voice formal, controlled. "You'll serve here in my household until I say otherwise. You'll obey my commands, follow my rules, and you will never, under any circumstances, speak of what you see or hear within these walls." He paused. "Is that clear?" Susan nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." He turned away, walking back toward his throne, his cloak sweeping behind him like dark wings. "You'll be assigned quarters, duties. Someone will explain the routines." He sat down again, his face returning to that cold, unreadable mask. Dismissed. Susan turned to leave, her legs somehow managing to carry her toward the doors. But just as her hand touched the handle, his voice stopped her. "Susan." She looked back. He was watching her, his golden eyes gleaming in the torchlight, his expression unreadable. "Welcome," he said softly, "to the Iron Dominion." The words should have sounded like a greeting. Instead, they sounded like a promise, or a warning. Susan stepped through the doors, and they closed behind her with a sound like fate sealing shut. Whatever came next, there was no going back now. The whispers started the very next morning. Susan heard them in the servants' corridors, in the laundry rooms, in the kitchens where she'd been assigned to help prepare meals. Always the same hushed tones, always the same warning looks cast in her direction. "Did you hear? The king has a new one. The barren girl from the Fraser family. Poor thing doesn't know what's coming. Give her 3 weeks, maybe 4 if she's lucky. Remember Lady Marceline? Beautiful as moonlight. Dead within a month." And that merchant's daughter from the south found her in the tower, pale as snow, not a mark on her. The curse always takes them, always. Susan kept her head down, scrubbing pots in the vast kitchen sink, her hands red and raw from the scalding water. She pretended not to hear, pretended not to notice the pitying glances, the knowing looks. But she heard everything, and slowly, piece by whispered piece, she began to understand. The Alpha King was cursed. Every woman who'd ever shared his bed, every woman who'd ever felt his touch in anything more than passing, had died. Some within days, others within weeks. But none had survived past the full moon. He barely looked at me after that first night. It had been 3 days since her arrival, 3 days of silence, 3 days of working in the shadows, invisible and forgotten, until this morning, when Mistress Teresa had found her in the kitchens. "You're being reassigned," she'd said, her expression unreadable. "The king returned from the border last night. There was a skirmish with the northern packs. He's injured." Susan's stomach had twisted. "And you want me to tend to him? You said you know healing songs, didn't you?" Mistress Teresa's gaze had been sharp, assessing. "The royal healer is with the soldiers who were wounded more severely. His Majesty refuses to wait." That's how Susan found herself standing outside the king's private chambers an hour later, a basin of warm water in her hands, clean bandages draped over her arm, and her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The guards opened the doors without a word, and there, standing before a window overlooking the vast courtyard below, was Sebastian Ross. He'd removed his armor, his shirt. His back was to her, and even in the pale morning light, she could see the evidence of battle, bruises darkening his ribs, cuts across his shoulder blades, and a deep gash along his left arm that still wept blood. "Your Majesty," Susan said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been sent to tend your wounds." He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her. For a long moment, she wondered if he'd even heard her. Then, finally, he spoke. "You're the Fraser girl. Yes, you know healing. Some. My mother's line carried the old knowledge. Songs. Herbs. Enough to help." Silence. Then, a low exhale. "Fine. Do what you came to do." Susan approached slowly, setting the basin on a nearby table. Her hands trembled as she wrung out a clean cloth, the warm water dripping between her fingers. "Just touch him. Clean the wounds. Don't think about the curse. Don't think about the women who died." She stepped closer, so close that his scent surrounded her again. Pine and smoke, and something darker. Her breath caught. "This may sting," she warned softly. He said nothing. Susan lifted the cloth to his shoulder, pressing it gently against the gash. He tensed, muscles coiling beneath her touch. But he didn't pull away. She worked in silence, cleaning the blood. Her movements careful and precise. It would heal. She reached for the healing salve, a mixture of yarrow and comfrey that one of the kitchen servants had given her. "This will help," she murmured, scooping some onto her fingers. And then, without thinking, her bare hand brushed against his skin as she smoothed the salve over his wound. The air crackled. A surge of something electric, something wild and primal, shot through her chest. Her breath hitched. The room seemed to tilt. Sebastian went rigid, his entire body locked, every muscle taut as a bowstring. Susan froze, her hand still against his arm, waiting for, she didn't know what. Pain. Death. The curse everyone whispered about. But nothing happened. No searing agony. No darkness creeping in. Just heat. His golden eyes were wide, shock written plainly across his face. "You!" He stopped, his voice rough. "Did you feel that?" "Yes," Susan whispered. He turned fully now, forcing her to step back. His gaze bore into hers, searching, confused, almost afraid. "I didn't hurt you," he said, and it sounded like a question and a statement at once. "No, you're certain. I'm standing here, aren't I?" Something flickered in his expression. He reached out, slowly, hesitantly, as if he were handling something fragile. His fingers brushed against her wrist, barely a touch. Again that crackle, that heat, but no pain, no curse. Sebastian pulled back quickly, his hand curling into a fist at his side. He stared at her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Finish the bandaging," he said abruptly, his voice harsh. "Then leave." Susan's hands shook as she wrapped the clean linen around his arm, securing it with practiced efficiency. She could feel his gaze on her the entire time, heavy and unreadable. When she finished, she stepped back, bowing her head. "Is there anything else you need, Your Majesty?" "No." The word was clipped. Final. Go. Susan gathered the basin and soiled bandages, moving toward the door. But just before she reached it, his voice stopped her again. Susan. She turned. He was still watching her, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed him. Confusion, wonder, and something that looked almost like hope. Thank you, he said quietly. She nodded, unable to find words, and slipped through the doors. That night, Sebastian stood before the mirror in his bathing chamber, staring at his reflection. The bandage on his arm was stark white against his tanned skin. A reminder. A question. She touched me, and I didn't hurt her. He'd felt it. The pull. The connection. His wolf had surged forward the moment her skin met his, desperate and wild. But instead of the familiar agony, the burning curse that struck every time he got too close to someone, there had been nothing. Just warmth. Or is she something? His ancestors' curse had been absolute. Every woman who dared to love him, to touch him with affection, had paid with her life. The moon goddess's punishment for the sins of his bloodline, a reminder that some crimes could never be forgiven. But Susan Fraser, barren, broken, sold like livestock, she'd touched him. And lived. Sebastian's reflection stared back at him, golden eyes troubled in the candlelight. What are you? He wondered. That strange warmth hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, spreading through her chest like embers catching flame. What was that? She'd expected pain, expected death. The whispers had been clear. The king's touch was fatal, but there had been no pain. Only, as if they were two pieces of something that had been broken apart long ago. Impossible. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Who is it? She called. Just me, dear. An older woman's voice, kind and tired. Marta, one of the kitchen servants who'd been kind to her. Marta slipped inside, glancing nervously down the corridor before closing it behind her. I heard you tended the king today, she said quietly. Yes. And? You're all right? I'm fine. Marta's eyes widened. Truly? You didn't feel anything strange? Susan hesitated. Why would I? The old woman sighed, sinking onto the edge of Susan's narrow bed. You don't know, do you? About the curse. I've heard whispers. It's more than whispers, child. Marta's voice dropped to barely above a breath. The king was cursed because of his bloodline. Something his ancestors did. Some sin against the moon goddess herself. And the punishment. Every touch of love becomes death. Every woman who's ever cared for him, ever let herself feel something for him, the curse takes them before the next full moon. Fear coiled in Susan's chest, cold and sharp. But if you touched him, and you're still here, Marta looked at her with something like wonder. Maybe you're different. Maybe you're the one who can break it. Or maybe, Susan said softly, her voice hollow, I'm just not capable of loving anyone anymore. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? The healers had declared her barren, broken, defective. Maybe the curse couldn't touch her, because there was nothing left in her to kill. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like the deepest loneliness she'd ever known, or just another woman the curse couldn't be bothered to claim. He came to her again 3 days later. Susan was in the healing room, a small chamber off the main kitchens where herbs hung drying from the rafters, and jars of salves lined rough wooden shelves. She'd been grinding yarrow root into powder when the door opened. She looked up, expecting Marta or one of the other servants. Instead, Sebastian Ross filled the doorway. Your Majesty. Susan immediately set down her mortar and pestle, wiping her hands on her apron. I wasn't. Is something wrong? The bandage needs changing, he said, his tone formal, distant. But his eyes betrayed him. They lingered on her face, her hands, the way a strand of hair had escaped her braid. It was healing well, the edges already beginning to close. It looks good, she said softly. No infection. You'll barely have a scar. Wolves heal quickly. His voice was low, rough. But your salve helped. She reached for the jar of healing ointment, scooping a small amount onto her fingers. And then, just as she had before, her bare skin touched his. That same crackle, that same warmth spreading through her chest like wildfire. Sebastian inhaled sharply. His hand shot out, catching her wrist, holding her still. Not painfully, just holding her. "You feel it too," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes," Susan whispered. For a moment, they stayed like that. Her fingers pressed against his arm, his hand wrapped around her wrist. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Sebastian released her, jaw tight, and looked away. When she tied the final knot, she stepped back, putting distance between them. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" He stood, towering over her in the small space. Before she could respond, he was gone. The visits became routine. Every few days he would appear, always with some excuse. A question about supplies, an inspection of the servants' quarters, a wound that needed tending after training exercises. But Susan saw through it. The way his gaze followed her movements, the way he positioned himself, just close enough that his scent surrounded her, the way he found reasons to stay, lingering in doorways, asking questions that didn't really need answers. And slowly, piece by careful piece, she began to see him, not the Alpha King who terrified nations, but the man beneath the crown. She saw him in the courtyard one morning, training with his soldiers. He didn't stand apart, barking orders from safety. He fought beside them, matching them blow for blow, his movements fluid and deadly. When one of the younger wolves took a hit too hard and went down, Sebastian was the first one there, helping him up, checking for injuries. She saw him in the great hall during council meetings, his expression grave as advisors reported casualties from border skirmishes. After one particularly brutal report, she'd watched him dismiss everyone, then sit alone at the long table, head bowed, shoulders heavy with the weight of lives lost. She saw him late one night in the library, standing before the windows overlooking his kingdom. He hadn't noticed her in the shadows, and she'd watched him press his palm against the glass, his reflection fractured in the moonlight, looking utterly, devastatingly alone. He grieves, she realized, for all of them, every life lost, every soul under his care. The ruthless Alpha King the world feared, carried the weight of mercy in silence. 2 weeks after her arrival, the northern border erupted again. Sebastian rode out at dawn with half his forces. When he returned 3 days later, his armor was dented, his face drawn with exhaustion, and a deep gash ran along his ribs. Mistress Teresa sent for Susan immediately. She found him in his chambers, struggling to remove his armor, blood seeping through the leather. His guards stood at the door, but he waved them away when she entered. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice rough with pain. They hesitated, then obeyed. The door closed. Silence fell. "Sit," Susan said softly, gesturing to the chair near the fireplace. "Before you collapse." He almost smiled. Almost. Giving orders to your king? Giving advice to a stubborn man who's bleeding all over his expensive carpet. This time he did smile. Just a ghost of one, but it transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. He sat. Susan knelt beside him, carefully removing the damaged armor, then cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. It was deep, angry, still bleeding freely. "This needs stitches," she said. "Then stitch it. It's going to hurt." "Everything hurts." His golden eyes met hers. "I'm used to it." The words carried more weight than they should have. Susan threaded the needle with practiced hands and began to work. Sebastian didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, unreadable. "How many did you lose?" she asked quietly. 4 good wolves. 3 more won't make it through the night." "I'm sorry." "War doesn't care about sorry." She tied off another stitch. "No, but people do." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows. "Do you believe in mercy, my king?" Susan asked softly, not looking up from her work. She felt him go still. "Why do you ask?" Because, she hesitated, then continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone says you're merciless, ruthless, a beast wearing a crown, but I've seen you with your soldiers. I've watched you carry the weight of every death, and I wonder if the world has you all wrong. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, his hand rose. Slowly, carefully, his fingers brushed against her cheek, tilting her face up so she had to look at him. His expression was raw, vulnerable, achingly honest. No, he said quietly. I don't believe in mercy. The world I inherited doesn't allow for it. Mercy is weakness. Compassion is liability. I learned that lesson the hard way, written in blood and ash. Her chest tightened. But, he continued, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, his touch impossibly gentle, I believe in you. The words hung between them, fragile and fierce. Susan's breath caught. Why? Because you touch me and don't flinch. You look at me and don't see a monster. You stand in my presence and refuse to break. His voice dropped to a whisper. Because when you're near, the beast inside me goes quiet. Something shifted. Deep in her chest, in the very core of her being, something ancient and primal stirred. A pull so strong it stole her breath, and in Sebastian's eyes, she saw his wolf rise to the surface, saw it recognize her, claim her. Mate, the word echoed through him like thunder. His wolf surged forward, violent and desperate, growling the truth he'd been denying for weeks. Mate. No. Impossible. She was barren, broken, a girl sold for debts. She couldn't be. She wasn't. But his wolf didn't care about logic, didn't care about curses or bloodlines or impossibilities. It knew. She was his. Sebastian pulled back abruptly, his hand falling away, his expression shuttering closed. He stood, putting distance between them, his jaw clenched so tight it could shatter stone. Finish the stitches, he said, his voice cold, controlled. Then go. Susan stared at him, confused, hurt flickering across her face. Did I say something wrong? No. The word was harsh, final. You said nothing wrong. That's the problem. He turned away, facing the fire, his shoulders rigid. Just go, Susan. Please. She finished the last stitch in silence, her hands shaking now. When she tied off the thread and stood, she hesitated. Your Majesty, go. She left, closing the door softly behind her. And Sebastian stood there, alone in his chambers, his wolf howling inside him, demanding he go after her, claim her, protect her. But he couldn't, because if she truly was his mate, if the bond he felt was real, then the curse would kill her, and he would rather spend eternity alone than watch another person he cared about die because of what he was. I'm sorry, he thought, pressing his palm against the wound she'd just tended. I'm so sorry. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, his heart broke just a little more, because some bonds, no matter how fated, were never meant to be claimed. The storm came without warning. One moment, the night was calm, stars scattered across the velvet sky. The next, thunder cracked like the world splitting open, and rain fell in sheets so thick Susan couldn't see the courtyard below her window. But it wasn't the storm that woke her. It was the light, silver, brilliant, flooding through her small room as if the moon itself had descended to earth. Susan sat up in bed, her heart racing. The light was coming from outside, pouring through her window, but when she looked, there was no moon, just storm clouds, black and roiling. And yet the light persisted, growing stronger, brighter. What? A voice, soft as silk and ancient as time, whispered through the thunder. Susan Fraser, daughter of the sealed line. Come. Susan's breath stopped. The room dissolved around her. The walls, the bed, the rough wooden floor, all of it melted away like mist, and suddenly she was standing in a vast empty space, filled with silver light. No ground beneath her feet, no sky above, just endless radiance. And there, before her, materialized a figure, a woman, tall and ethereal, her form shifting like moonlight on water. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver. Her gown seemed woven from starlight itself. But it was her eyes that stole Susan's breath. They burned, flickered, like flames trapped in ice, ancient and terrible, and beautiful beyond words. You, Susan's voice was barely a whisper. You're the moon goddess. The figure smiled, sad and knowing. I am. And you, child, you are more than you believe. I don't understand. The goddess moved closer, her presence both comforting and overwhelming. She reached out, her hand hovering over Susan's heart, not quite touching. They told you that you were barren, she said softly, that your womb was broken, empty, cursed. Tears burned Susan's eyes. Yes, they were wrong. The words hung in the air like a benediction. You are not barren, Susan Fraser. You are sealed. Sealed, Susan's voice cracked. I don't. What does that mean? The goddess's flaming eyes softened. Your bloodline traces back to the moon priestesses, my chosen daughters, women who carried divine power in their veins, power to heal what is cursed, to mend what is broken, to bear what is divine. She paused, her hand moving to hover over Susan's womb. But such power comes with a price. You cannot bear children of flesh and blood alone. Your womb is sealed until you find your true mate, the one whose soul is bound to yours by fate itself. Only then will the seal break. Only then will you bear the child of prophecy. Susan's legs trembled. She sank to her knees in the endless silver light. A child of prophecy? A being who will end the age of curses, who will heal the rift between wolf and divine, who will bring balance to what was broken long ago. The goddess knelt before her, taking Susan's face in hands that felt like warm sunlight. You were never broken, child. You were chosen, protected, waiting for the moment when your power would be needed most. But why me? Susan whispered. Why now? Because the Alpha King carries my curse, a punishment for sins his ancestors committed against my priestesses. Every touch of love becomes death, unless that touch comes from one who bears my blood. Realization crashed over Susan like a wave. Sebastian is your fated mate. Your wolf recognizes him, even though you cannot shift. His wolf knows you, even though he refuses to believe it. And your blood, your blessed, divine blood, is the only thing that can break his curse. Tears spilled down Susan's cheeks. How? The goddess smiled, pressing her palm over Susan's heart. Heat flooded through her, warm and bright and impossibly powerful. Your touch neutralizes the curse. Your love can break it forever, but only if both of you choose it. Fate brings souls together, child, but love is always a choice. The light began to fade. The goddess's form grew translucent. Wake now, daughter of the moon, and remember, you are not worthless. You are priceless, and the man who owns your chains will soon kneel before your light. Susan woke, gasping. The storm still raged outside, but her room was dark again. Normal, real, except she looked down at her hands and froze. Her palms were glowing, faintly, softly, like moonlight trapped beneath her skin. No, that's not possible. I'm dreaming. I must be. She pressed her palms together, and the glow intensified. She could feel it now, a warmth, a power humming beneath her skin, alive and ancient, and utterly foreign. Your blood carries my power. The goddess's words echoed in her mind. Susan stared at her glowing hands, fear and wonder warring in her chest. What am I? She wasn't the only one who saw the light. Lord Paul, Sebastian's most trusted advisor, had been crossing the courtyard when the storm hit. He'd sought shelter under an archway, waiting for the rain to pass, and that's when he'd seen it. A glow, faint but unmistakable, coming from one of the servants' windows on the 3rd floor. Silver light, pulsing, unnatural. His blood ran cold. He knew that light, had seen it once before, in his grandfather's texts, in the forbidden histories no one spoke of anymore. Moon priestess magic, witch's blood. By dawn, Lord Paul stood before the council chamber, his face grave, his voice urgent, as he addressed the gathered nobles. The girl bears witch's blood, he announced without preamble. I saw it myself. Silver light emanating from her chambers during the lunar storm, the mark of the old priestesses. Mutters rippled through the council. Fear, suspicion. Are you certain? Lady Verin, the eldest counsellor, leaned forward. Such bloodlines were thought extinct. I know what I saw. Lord Paul's jaw tightened. And if she truly carries that power, she could undo everything we've worked to maintain. The balance of the Pax, the order we've preserved, the king's curse itself. The curse keeps him isolated, another counsellor said quietly. Keeps him from forming alliances through marriage, keeps the power consolidated. Exactly, Lord Paul's eyes glinted. If this girl breaks the curse, if the king takes her as his Luna, everything changes. Silence fell, heavy, calculating. Then we remove her, Lady Verin said finally, her voice cold as winter. Before she becomes a problem we cannot solve. Carefully, Lord Paul warned. The king has taken an interest in her. We must be subtle. Leave that to me, Lady Verin said, a cruel smile touching her lips. There are many ways for a servant girl to meet an unfortunate end. The council nodded. Agreed. Began to plot. None of them noticed the shadow in the corridor outside. The young guard who'd overheard everything and was now running, his heart pounding, toward the one person who might be able to stop what was coming. Susan had hidden the glow by wrapping her hands in cloth, claiming she'd burned them in the kitchens. Marta had clucked sympathetically and given her salve, asking no questions. But Susan couldn't stop thinking about the dream, the goddess, the revelation. You are not barren. You are sealed. Your blood neutralizes his curse. Could it be true? Or was she losing her mind, grasping at impossible hopes like she had as a child? She was still wrestling with these thoughts when the door to the healing room burst open. Sebastian stood there, chest heaving, his eyes wild, desperate. Your Majesty, He crossed the room in 3 strides, catching her face in his hands. Tell me I'm wrong, he said roughly. Tell me I'm imagining this. Tell me you're not, that we're not. Sebastian, she whispered, using his name for the first time. Something in him broke. He kissed her. Desperate, defiant, claiming her mouth like a man drowning and she was air itself. And the moment their lips met, power erupted. The curse flared, black and vicious, rising like smoke from his skin. Susan felt it. The death, the poison, the divine punishment trying to strike her down. But her blood, her blessed, divine blood, rose to meet it. Silver light burst from her palms, still pressed against his chest. It flowed through her, bright and warm and impossibly strong, wrapping around the curse, neutralizing it, dissolving it, like darkness meeting dawn. The curse screamed, writhed, then vanished. Sebastian pulled back, gasping. His eyes were wide, shocked, his hands still framing her face. You, he stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The curse. It tried to strike, but you stopped it. Susan looked down at her hands. The cloth wrappings had fallen away. Her palms glowed brighter now, silver light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. I don't understand it, she whispered. But the moon goddess, she came to me. She said my blood could heal what's cursed. Your blood. Sebastian's voice was hoarse, reverent. He caught her wrists, staring at the light emanating from her skin. You're a moon priestess. I don't know what I am. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But I know this. When I touch you, the curse has no power. Sebastian pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, his hands trembling. You're my salvation, he breathed. You're not broken, Susan. You never were. You're everything. For one perfect moment, they stood there, 2 broken pieces finally finding each other whole. But outside the healing room, in the shadowed corridors of the Iron Dominion, the Council's assassins were already moving, and the real battle was just beginning. The summons came at dawn. The king requires your presence in the throne room. Immediately. Susan's stomach twisted as she followed the guard through the winding corridors. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the oppressive silence, in the way servants avoided her gaze, in the cold dread settling into her bones. When the throne room doors opened, she understood why. The entire court was assembled. Nobles in their finest garments lined both sides of the vast chamber. Advisors stood in a semicircle before the obsidian throne, and at the center of it all, presiding over them like a judge at an execution, Sebastian sat rigid on his throne, his face carved from stone, his golden eyes unreadable. He didn't look at her as she entered. Susan's heart stuttered. Lord Paul stood at the base of the throne steps, a scroll clutched in his hands, his expression one of righteous vindication. "Susan Fraser," he announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Step forward." She moved on numb legs, feeling every eye in the room tracking her, judging her, condemning her before she even knew the charges. "You stand accused," Lord Paul continued, unrolling the scroll with theatrical precision, "of deception, of concealing your true nature, of infiltrating this court under false pretenses." "I don't understand," Susan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've done nothing wrong." "Haven't you? Your family cast you out as worthless." Each word was a knife, carefully placed to inflict maximum damage. Murmurs rippled through the court. Disgust, pity, contempt. "And yet," Lord Paul continued, his voice rising, "you presented yourself here as merely a servant, never revealing your shameful past, never disclosing that you are defective, broken, incapable of bearing the heirs this kingdom needs." "I never claimed to be anything," Susan said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I was brought here as a slave. I've served as I was commanded. But you've also," Lord Paul's eyes glittered dangerously, "caught the king's attention, spent time alone with him, tended his wounds, whispered in his ear." He turned to face Sebastian, his voice dropping to something almost sympathetic. "Your Majesty, this woman has deceived you. She carries witch's blood. I witnessed it myself during the lunar storm. Silver light emanating from her chambers. The mark of the forbidden priestesses." The court erupted. Shouts, accusations, fear. "Witch, she'll curse us all. Execute her." Susan's gaze shot to Sebastian. Surely he would defend her. Surely he would remember what they'd shared. The kiss, the way her power had saved him from his curse. But Sebastian sat motionless, silent, his face betraying nothing. "Your Majesty," Lord Paul pressed, "for the safety of this court, for the stability of the realm, this woman must be dealt with. She is a threat to everything we've built." Still, Sebastian said nothing. And in that silence, Susan's heart shattered. "You said I belong to you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She didn't care that the whole court could hear, didn't care about the consequences. You said I was your salvation." Sebastian's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of his throne until his knuckles went white. But he remained silent. "I see." Susan's voice went cold, dead. "I belong to you, but only when it served you. Only when no one was watching. Only when it was convenient." She took a step back, then another, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly. "You're not a prisoner of your curse. You're a coward hiding behind it." She turned and ran. Behind her, she heard Lady Verin's voice, sharp and commanding. "Guards! Stop her!" But Susan was already through the doors, racing down the corridor, her feet barely touching the ground. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just needed to get away. Away from the court, away from the accusations, away from him, away from the man she'd been foolish enough to believe in. The forest was dark and cold. Susan stumbled through the underbrush, branches tearing at her dress, her lungs burning. She'd fled through the servants' entrance, past the walls, into the wild woods that bordered the fortress. She didn't stop until her legs gave out. Collapsing against a massive oak tree, she finally let the tears come, great, racking sobs that tore through her chest. She'd been so stupid. So pathetically, desperately stupid. Wolves, all of them, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They wore the dark cloaks of the king's guard, but something about them was wrong. Their movements too predatory, their smiles too cruel. "Well, well," one of them said, his voice oily. "The witch, alone in the woods. How convenient. Assassins, sent by the council." Susan scrambled to her feet, backing away. "Stay away from me." "Can't do that, sweetheart." The leader drew a blade. "Orders are orders, nothing personal." They circled her, cutting off any escape. Susan's hands began to tremble, and then they began to glow. Silver light burst from her palms, bright and fierce. Power flooded through her veins, wild and untrained but desperate, alive. I said, "Stay away." She thrust her hands forward, and light exploded outward. One of the assassins screamed as it hit him, sending him flying backward into a tree. He crumpled, unconscious. The others hesitated, shocked. "She is a witch," one hissed. "Then we kill her faster," the leader snarled, shifting into his wolf form. They attacked as one. Susan fought. Her power flashed through the trees like lightning, striking out instinctively. She caught one wolf across the snout, sending him yelping. Dodged another's lunge, her newfound speed surprising even herself. But they were trained warriors, and she was one girl who'd discovered her power days ago. A blade sliced across her arm. She cried out, stumbling. Another wolf caught her from behind, teeth snapping inches from her throat. "I'm going to die here, alone, in the dark." Then a roar split the night. Not a human sound, not even fully wolf. Something ancient, primal, absolutely terrifying. A massive black wolf, larger than any she'd ever seen, exploded from the tree line. Its eyes blazed gold. Its fangs were bared in pure fury. Sebastian. He moved like death itself. One assassin died instantly, throat torn out before he could even shift. Another tried to run and was brought down within 3 strides. The wolf that had been behind Susan released her and turned to face the king. It didn't get the chance. Sebastian ripped through him with savage efficiency. "No one," he growled, his voice barely human, "touches her." The body fell. Silence descended, broken only by Susan's ragged breathing and the drip of blood from Sebastian's wounds. He stood there, chest heaving, covered in blood, some his, most not, his eyes still wild with rage, and something else, something that looked like terror. Then he saw her, really saw her, the cut on her arm, the tears streaking her face, the way she trembled, and he broke. Sebastian crossed to her in 3 strides and fell to his knees before her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch, afraid he'd already lost her. "Susan!" he choked out. "Susan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You were silent," she whispered, fresh tears spilling. "In the throne room, when they called me a witch, when they condemned me, you said nothing. I was a coward." His voice cracked. "They were right. You were right. I hid behind protocol, behind politics, behind fear. I thought silence would protect you, that if I didn't claim you publicly, the council wouldn't see you as a threat. But they already did. I know." He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. "And I failed you. I let you believe you were alone, let you run into danger. I almost—" his voice broke completely. "I almost lost you." Susan stared down at him, the fearsome Alpha King, kneeling in the dirt, covered in blood, weeping, for her. "Never run from me again," he said, finally looking up, his golden eyes blazing with desperate intensity. "Please, Susan, never again. I can't survive losing you." "You let them call me worthless," she whispered. "You're not." He caught her hands, pressing them to his chest, right over his heart. "You're not my servant. You're not my possession. You're not broken or defective or any of the lies they told you." His voice dropped to something raw and honest and achingly vulnerable. "You're my salvation, my mate, my everything." The words hung in the air between them. Susan's breath hitched. "Your mate? My wolf knew the moment you arrived. I've been fighting it, denying it, terrified that claiming you would kill you." He pressed his forehead to their joined hands. "But you're stronger than the curse, stronger than my fear, stronger than anything I've ever known. Sebastian, come back with me," he pleaded. "Let me stand before that court and tell them the truth, that you're mine, that anyone who touches you answers to me, that I will burn the world before I let them harm you again." Susan looked down at him, at the man who'd just killed for her, bled for her, knelt for her, the man who'd finally chosen her. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything." No more silence. No more hiding. If I'm yours, then you're mine. And the world gets to know it. Sebastian surged to his feet, catching her face in his bloodied hands. I promise. On my crown. On my life. On everything I am. Then he kissed her, fierce and claiming, and full of desperate promise. And this time, when the curse tried to rise, it didn't just vanish. It shattered, like glass breaking, like chains falling away. Years of divine punishment, unmade by a single choice, love. They were waiting at the fortress gates, 20 guards, silver chains, and Lord Paul, his face twisted with cold satisfaction. Your Majesty, he said, his voice dripping with false respect. By order of the High Council, you are both to be detained pending trial for violation of sacred law. Sebastian stepped in front of Susan, his body a shield. On what grounds? You've consorted with a witch, allowed forbidden magic within these walls, endangered the realm. Lord Paul's eyes gleamed. And she stands accused of using dark arts to seduce and manipulate the crown. That's a lie, Susan breathed. Is it? Lady Verin emerged from behind the guards, her expression triumphant. We have witnesses, servants who saw the silver light, guards who heard you speak of moon goddess blessings, your own confession before you fled. Sebastian's hands clenched into fists. I am your king. You have no authority. The law is clear, Your Majesty. Lord Paul unrolled another scroll, his voice taking on the cadence of ritual. Ancient law, written in blood during the Purge Wars. When a member of the royal line is accused of harboring forbidden magic, the council has authority to detain until trial. Even you are not above the law your ancestors created. Sebastian's wolf surged beneath his skin, desperate to break free, to kill them all. But Susan's hand touched his arm, gently, grounding him. Don't, she whispered. If you fight them now, they'll call you corrupted. They'll say I've bewitched you. This is what they want. She was right. He knew she was right. But watching them clamp silver chains around her wrists, seeing her flinch as the blessed metal burned her skin, felt like dying. It's all right, Susan said softly, meeting his gaze. I'm not afraid. I am. He wanted to scream. I'm terrified. They chained him too. Silver manacles that suppressed his shift, weakened his wolf. Ancient restraints designed to hold even an alpha king. And then they were dragged, separately, into the depths of the fortress. The trial lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of accusations, false testimonies, manufactured evidence. They brought servants who claimed Susan had cursed them with nightmares, guards who swore she'd tried to poison the king's mind, even a healer who testified that her cures were actually dark magic designed to create dependency. All lies, all carefully orchestrated. Susan stood in the center of the chamber, chains weighing her down, her head high despite everything. She defended herself with quiet dignity, refuting each claim with logic and truth. But the council wasn't interested in truth. They wanted blood. Sebastian sat bound to a chair on a raised platform, forced to watch, forbidden by law from speaking, until the council rendered their verdict. Every fiber of his being screamed to break free, to stop this travesty. But the silver chains held, and ancient law gagged him more effectively than any physical restraint. Finally, Lord Paul stood. The evidence is clear. Susan Fraser, you are found guilty of witchcraft, manipulation of the crown, and treason against the realm. The chamber erupted in approval. Nobles who'd never spoken to her cheered her condemnation. The sentence, Lord Paul continued, his voice cutting through the noise, is death, to be carried out immediately, in accordance with ancient tradition. No, Sebastian's voice was raw, breaking through his enforced silence. No, I forbid it. You have no authority here, Your Majesty, Lady Verin said coldly. You've been compromised. Until we determine the extent of her influence, you are relieved of command. You cannot. We can. And we have. Lord Paul gestured to the guards. Take her to the execution hall. Prepare the blade. They dragged Susan away, and Sebastian's roar shook the chamber walls. The execution hall was underground, a circular chamber carved from black stone, with a single raised platform in the center. Torches lined the walls, casting dancing shadows that looked like demons witnessing judgment. The entire court assembled. This was to be a warning, a spectacle, a reminder of what happened to those who threatened the order. Susan was forced to kneel on the platform, her head positioned over a stone block worn smooth by centuries of executions. The executioner, a massive wolf in human form, stood beside her, a silver blade gleaming in his hands. Sebastian was dragged in last, still chained, and forced to stand at the front of the crowd, close enough to see everything, too far to stop it. They want me to watch, he realized with sick clarity. They want me to witness what happens when I defy them.
Any last words?
Lord Paul asked Susan, his tone almost bored. Susan lifted her head, her gaze finding Sebastian's across the chamber, and she smiled. Soft, sad, forgiving. I'm not afraid, she said quietly. I never was. Not of death, not of judgment. Her voice grew stronger. I was only ever afraid of not mattering, of being nothing. Tears streamed down Sebastian's face. But I know now, Susan continued, her eyes never leaving his, that I mattered to someone, that I was seen, chosen, loved. Her smile widened. So no, I have no regrets. Then let justice be done, Lord Paul intoned. The executioner raised his blade, and Sebastian's control shattered. The silver chains exploded outward, as if they were made of paper, not blessed metal. Power erupted from him, raw and primal and unstoppable. The wolf that had been caged, suppressed, held back by laws and fear and restraint, burst free. But this wasn't a normal shift. His wolf was massive, larger than any in living memory, black as midnight, with eyes that burned like molten gold. Ancient power rolled off him in waves, making the very stones of the chamber tremble. He was Alpha. Not just of this pack, not just of this kingdom. Alpha of alphas, the Wolf King in his truest form. The executioner stumbled back, blade falling from nerveless fingers. Guards reached for weapons but froze, their wolves cowering before the sheer dominance radiating from Sebastian. He shifted back to human form mid-leap, landing on the platform beside Susan, shattering the stone block with the force of his landing. He tore the chains from her wrists with his bare hands, pulling her up, pulling her close, sheltering her against his chest. Then he turned to face the court. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer quite human. It resonated with ancient power, with divine authority, with the voice of every alpha who'd ever ruled. She is my Luna. The words echoed through the chamber. Final. Absolute, irrevocable. You cannot. Lord Paul started. I am your king. The roar shook dust from the ceiling. And you, all of you, have committed treason. You imprisoned your sovereign. You condemned an innocent. You defied the will of the crown and the law of the mate bond. Sebastian's eyes blazed as he looked at each council member in turn. Sebastian's laugh was bitter. Broken. You tried to murder the one person who could save me. Save all of us. He looked down at Susan, his expression softening. She carries the blood of the moon priestesses. Divine blood. The very power you call witchcraft is a blessing from the goddess herself. He pulled Susan closer, his hand cradling her face, and her touch, her love, her courage, broke a curse that has plagued my line for generations. As if to prove his words, silver light began to emanate from where they touched, soft at first, then growing brighter. It spread across the platform, through the chamber, touching every person present, and they felt it. The curse that had hung over the kingdom like a shroud for so long, cracking, splintering, breaking apart like glass under divine hammer blows. The air itself seemed to lighten. The oppressive weight that had lingered in the fortress for years vanished. Sebastian lifted Susan's hand to his lips, kissing her glowing palm. She is not a witch. She is not a threat. She is my salvation, my heart, my Luna. He turned back to the court, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. And anyone who tries to harm her again will answer to me, not as your king, but as the mate who will burn this kingdom to ash before letting her suffer. Silence. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then, slowly, one of the younger nobles dropped to one knee, then another, and another. Within moments, the entire court knelt. Even the council, pale and shaking, bowed their heads. All except Lord Paul, who stood frozen, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. You would choose her over the stability of the realm, over centuries of order? Sebastian's smile was sharp as a blade. I would choose her over everything, because without her, his voice softened, became achingly honest. Without her, there is no realm worth ruling, no future worth fighting for, no light worth seeking. He looked down at Susan, and the love in his eyes could have lit the darkest night. She is my Luna, he repeated, this time gently. A vow, a promise, a truth written in starlight and sealed in divine fire. And as if in answer, the silver light blazing from Susan's palms surged upward, flooding the chamber. The curse didn't just crack, it shattered completely. The chains of divine punishment, forged in ancient sin and sealed in blood, unmade by a choice, by love freely given, by a barren girl who'd been called worthless, and the cursed king who'd learned that she was priceless. If anything, it grew brighter. The silver radiance emanating from Susan intensified, flooding the execution hall until it was impossible to see, impossible to breathe, impossible to do anything but fall to your knees before its terrible beauty. Sebastian felt it first. A presence. Ancient, vast, divine. His wolf, so powerful moments ago, whimpered and bowed within him. The air crackled with power that made even his alpha dominance feel like a candle before the sun. Every instinct screamed at him to submit, to lower his gaze, to prostrate himself before what was coming. But he didn't release Susan. Wouldn't. Couldn't. The light coalesced, gathering above the platform like a star descending to earth. And from that brilliance, she appeared. The moon goddess. She was exactly as Susan had described. Impossibly tall, her form shifting between solid and ethereal, like moonlight given shape. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver, and her gown seemed woven from starlight itself. Beautiful beyond comprehension, terrible beyond imagining. But it was her eyes that stole every breath in the chamber. They burned, flickered, like flames trapped in ice, ancient and knowing, and absolutely merciless. The entire court collapsed. Nobles, guards, even the council members who'd orchestrated the execution, fell to their faces, trembling before divine presence. Only Sebastian remained standing, Susan cradled against his chest. The goddess's gaze swept the chamber, her expression unreadable. When her eyes landed on the execution block, still stained with the blood of past victims, her lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "How quickly mortals forget," she said, her voice like thunder wrapped in silk, resonating through every stone, every bone, every soul present. "How eagerly you condemn what you don't understand. How readily you destroy what could save you." Lord Paul dared to lift his head. "Great goddess, we only sought to..." Silence. The word wasn't loud, but it carried such weight that Paul's jaw snapped shut, his body going rigid, as if turned to stone. The goddess descended, her feet not quite touching the ground, moving toward the platform where Sebastian stood holding Susan. With each step, the temperature dropped. Frost began to form on the walls, the floor, spreading outward from her presence, like winter claiming the world. She stopped before them. This close, her power was overwhelming, suffocating. Sebastian's knees trembled with the effort to remain standing, but he refused to bow, refused to let go of Susan. The goddess studied them both, her expression thoughtful. "Sebastian Ross," she said, and hearing his name in that divine voice felt like being unmade and rebuilt. Son of the cursed line. descendant of those who sinned against my priestesses. Yes, his voice was rough but steady. You carry my curse, a punishment for the crimes your ancestors committed. They violated my sacred daughters, murdered them when they refused to submit, used their divine blood for dark rituals. Her eyes narrowed. For 3 generations, I decreed that every touch of love would become death, that no heir would be born from affection, only from duty, that your line would suffer as mine did. I know, Sebastian said quietly, and I've paid that price. My entire life, I've been alone, isolated, unable to touch, to love, to connect. He looked down at Susan, and his voice softened. Until her. Yes, until her. The goddess's gaze shifted to Susan, and something almost like warmth flickered in those terrible eyes. My last priestess, my final daughter, hidden and sealed, waiting for this moment. She reached out, and Sebastian tensed, ready to move Susan away. But the goddess's hand merely hovered over Susan's forehead, not quite touching. You saved him. Your blood neutralized the curse. Your love began to break it. She paused. But the breaking is not complete. Sebastian's heart stuttered. What do you mean? A curse cannot be broken by loopholes. It must be unmade by choice, by sacrifice. The goddess pulled back, her expression becoming solemn, judicial. And so I offer you one. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Sebastian Ross, you defied the law of divine bond. You resisted your mate. You denied fate itself out of fear. Her voice took on the weight of judgment. And now you must choose. She gestured, and 2 images appeared in the air. In one, Sebastian sat upon his throne, powerful and alone, ruling his kingdom with iron authority. In the other, he stood beside Susan, no crown upon his head, but joy in his eyes. Your crown, or your mate. Silence. Absolute. Devastating. Choose your power, and she lives but the curse remains. You will rule, but you will rule alone, forever unable to claim her, without killing her. The goddess's eyes blazed. Choose her, and you surrender everything. Your crown, your authority, your wolf's dominance. You become nothing but a man, mortal and powerless. No. Susan's voice, weak but fierce, broke the silence. She pushed against Sebastian's chest, forcing him to look at her. No, you can't. You're the Alpha King. Your people need you. The realm needs you. I don't care, Sebastian said simply. Sebastian, I don't care, he repeated, his voice breaking. Don't you understand? I've been king for 10 years. 10 years of power and authority and absolute control. And I've been empty, hollow, more prisoner than ruler. He set her down gently, then turned to face the goddess fully, and without hesitation, without doubt, without any of the pride that had defined him for so long. He knelt. The Alpha King, who'd never bowed to anyone, dropped to his knees before the divine and lowered his head. I choose her, he said clearly. I surrender my crown, my power, my wolf, my kingdom. I give it all freely, without reservation, without regret. Sebastian, no, Susan tried to reach for him, but her legs gave out. The power that had been sustaining her, the divine gift keeping her standing, suddenly faltered. I choose her, Sebastian continued, his voice growing stronger, even as he surrendered everything, because a king without her is no king at all. A crown without love is just cold metal. Power without purpose is just tyranny. He lifted his head, meeting the goddess's blazing gaze. Take it all. I don't want it. I never wanted it. I only ever wanted. His voice broke completely. I only ever wanted to be worthy of her. The goddess stared at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she began to smile. Finally, she whispered. Finally, one of your line understands. She turned to Susan, who'd collapsed on the platform, her palms still glowing but dimming now, her strength draining away. And you, daughter, you gave everything. Your power, your life force, your divine gift, all spent to neutralize his curse, to save a man who couldn't save himself. Susan's eyes fluttered. I would do it again, she breathed, 1,000 times. I know. The goddess knelt beside her, and this time she did touch. her hand pressed against Susan's forehead, gentle as a benediction. Your ancestors were violated, murdered, used for their power, and yet you chose to love the descendant of those who destroyed them. He is not his ancestors, Susan whispered. He is everything. The goddess's smile widened, becoming something warm, proud, almost maternal. Love has rewritten fate, she said softly. Choice has unmade punishment. Sacrifice has balanced the scales. She stood, her hand still on Susan's forehead, and light poured from her palm. Not the cold silver of judgment, but something warm, golden, life-giving. I declare the curse, broken, not by loopholes, not by divine blood alone, but by love freely chosen, by sacrifice freely given, by two souls who looked at fate and said, no more. The light exploded outward. Sebastian felt it. The curse that had lived in his bones, his blood, his very soul for his entire life, dissolving, not painfully, gently, like ice melting under spring sun. He gasped as power flooded back into him. Not the power of dominance, not alpha authority or royal privilege. Something purer, simpler, the power to touch, to love, to live without fear of killing everything he cared about. But Susan, she collapsed completely, her glow fading, her body going limp. The divine gift that had sustained her, that had protected her, that had saved him, spent, gone, used up in the breaking. Susan! Sebastian caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. No, no, please. Susan, stay with me. Her eyes opened, just barely. Did it work? She whispered. Is the curse? It's gone. You did it. You saved me. Tears streamed down his face. But please, don't leave me. Please. I can't do this without you. The goddess watched them, her expression tender. Peace. Sebastian Ross. She is not dying, only sleeping. She touched Susan's forehead once more, and warmth flooded back into her skin. Color returned to her cheeks. She gave her divine power to save you, but her life, her soul, her love, those remain. Susan's breathing steadied, deepened. She curled against Sebastian's chest, unconscious but alive. So impossibly, beautifully alive. She will wake, the goddess said. And when she does, she will be mortal, human. No more divine gifts, no more silver light. Her smile turned knowing. But her womb, that seal is broken too. You will have your heirs, Alpha King, children born not of curse or duty, but of love. Sebastian looked up sharply. You're giving me back my crown. I never took it. The goddess's eyes gleamed with amusement. You offered it, and in that offering, you proved you were worthy to keep it. A true king rules not from power, but from love, from sacrifice, from understanding that some things matter more than crowns. She began to fade, her form becoming translucent. Rule well, Sebastian Ross. Love fiercely. And remember, the girl they called worthless saved you all. Her final words echoed through the chamber as she vanished into light. She was never barren, never broken, never worthless. She was waiting for you, and you were waiting for her. Now go and rewrite the world. The light faded. The moon goddess was gone, and Sebastian knelt on the execution platform, holding his mate, his Luna, his salvation. Finally free. 6 weeks after the moon goddess vanished, spring arrived at the Iron Dominion. The obsidian fortress that had once seemed like a monument to darkness and power now gleamed in the sunlight, its towers catching the dawn like beacons of hope. Flowers bloomed in the courtyards. Children laughed in the streets beyond the walls. And for the first time in living memory, the people sang. Susan stood at the window of the royal chambers, watching the kingdom wake. She still wasn't used to this. The silk gowns instead of rough servants' clothes, the guards bowing instead of sneering, the title they whispered with reverence instead of contempt. Luna, you should be resting. Sebastian's voice, warm and sleep-rough, came from behind her. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. The coronation is in 3 hours. You need your strength. Susan leaned into him, marveling as she always did that she could. that his touch brought warmth instead of death, life instead of curse. "I can't sleep," she admitted softly. "I keep thinking, what if I wake up and this is all a dream? What if I'm still in that servant's cell and none of this is real?" Sebastian turned her to face him, his golden eyes serious. "Then we're sharing the same dream, and I never want to wake up." He kissed her, gentle, reverent, the way he'd kissed her every morning since the goddess had freed them. When they parted, Susan traced the line of his jaw, still amazed that she could touch him freely. "Have you finished the proclamations?" "Yes." Sebastian's expression grew solemn. "Signed and sealed. By noon today, half of the conquered territories will be returned to their original packs. The Iron Dominion will be smaller, but it will be united by choice, not fear." It had been his first decree after the curse broke, to renounce the lands taken by force, to offer peace instead of dominance, to rebuild what generations of his ancestors had destroyed through conquest and cruelty. The council had protested, of course, Lord Paul especially, though his voice carried less weight now that everyone knew he'd tried to execute their future Luna. But Sebastian had been immovable. "A king who rules through fear," he'd said, "is no king at all, just a tyrant with a crown." "They'll call you weak," Susan had warned. "Let them." His smile had been fierce. "I'd rather be called weak and sleep peacefully beside you than be called powerful and sleep alone in an empty fortress." Now, in the quiet of dawn, Susan pressed her forehead to his. "You're not weak. You're the strongest man I've ever known. Only because you make me brave." The coronation began at midday. The throne room had been transformed. Gone were the dark banners of conquest. Instead, silver and white silk draped the walls, interwoven with spring flowers. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, washing away shadows that had lingered for decades. The entire court assembled, but this time, the crowd included more than just nobles, common wolves, human servants, border families who'd been invited to witness the dawn of a new era. Sebastian stood before the throne in ceremonial armor, silver and black, his dark hair tied back, his expression regal but warm. When he looked at Susan, waiting at the far end of the chamber, his entire face softened. The high priestess, an ancient wolf with kind eyes and silver fur, raised her staff. "Let the Luna approach." Susan walked forward, her gown flowing behind her like liquid moonlight. It had been made specially, woven with silver thread that caught the light with every step. Her hair was braided with white roses, and on her wrist, deliberately left uncovered, the scar where the rope had once bound her. She'd refused to let the healers remove it. "It's a reminder," she'd said, "of where I came from, of what was broken, and what was remade." When she reached the platform, Sebastian descended the steps to meet her, not making her climb to him, but coming down to stand beside her. Equal. The priestess smiled. "Sebastian Ross, Alpha King of the Iron Dominion, you have chosen your mate. Do you claim her before these witnesses?" "I do." His voice rang clear and strong. "Before the pack, before the realm, before the goddess herself, I claim Susan Fraser as my mate, my Luna, my queen. And you, Susan Fraser, do you accept this claim? Do you choose to stand beside him, to rule with him, to bind your life to his?" Susan's throat tightened with emotion. She looked at Sebastian, at the man who'd killed for her, bled for her, surrendered his crown for her. "I do," she whispered. Then louder, "I do." The priestess lifted a silver circlet, delicate and beautiful, woven to look like moonlight frozen in metal. "Then by the power vested in me, by the blessing of the moon goddess, by the will of this pack, I crown you Luna, Queen of Mercy, Mother of the New Age." She placed the circlet on Susan's head. The court erupted in cheers. Wolves howled, humans shouted. The sound shook the rafters, joyous and wild, and absolutely perfect. Sebastian pulled her close and kissed her as the crowd roared approval. When they parted, both were crying. "My queen," he murmured. "My king," she answered. Hand in hand, they turned to face their people. No longer the cursed alpha and the worthless girl, but the king who'd learned mercy, and the queen who'd taught him love. That evening, after the feast and the dancing and the endless well-wishes, Sebastian led Susan to the courtyard. The same courtyard where she'd first arrived, bound and terrified and certain she was going to die. Now it was transformed. The rain was gone. Stars scattered across the velvet sky, and a single torch burned where she'd once stood, shivering in the cold. "Do you remember?" Sebastian asked softly. "Every moment." Susan looked at the spot where the guards had called her the infertile one, where she'd been dragged like an animal, where she'd believed her life was ending. Sebastian knelt before her, right there, in the place where he'd once towered over her with cold indifference, where he'd ordered her to follow him without kindness or care. He took her left hand, the one with the scar, and brought it to his lips. Then, slowly, reverently, he traced the mark with his fingertips. "You were sold," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Traded like property, called worthless. Broken, barren." Tears spilled down Susan's cheeks. "And I," Sebastian looked up at her, his golden eyes swimming with emotion. "I was too blind to see what you were, too afraid to claim you, too cursed to deserve you. Sebastian. But you stayed," he continued. "You touched me when everyone else feared me. You saw me when I'd been invisible for so long. You loved me when I'd forgotten what love even felt like." He pressed his forehead to her scarred wrist, his shoulders shaking. "You were sold, but I chose you. Every day, every moment, every breath, I choose you." Susan sank to her knees before him, cupping his face in her hands. "And still," she whispered, smiling through her tears, "you chose me." They held each other in that courtyard, two broken souls made whole, as the moon rose above them. And that's when Susan felt it, a flutter, so faint she almost missed it. Deep in her core, in the womb that had been declared barren, in the place that had been sealed by divine power, a heartbeat, not her own. Smaller, impossibly precious, unmistakably real. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her abdomen. Sebastian pulled back, alarmed. "What? What's wrong?" She stared at him, wonder and disbelief warring on her face. I think," her voice failed. She caught his hand and pressed it to her stomach. "Do you feel it?" For a moment, nothing. Then Sebastian's eyes went wide. His wolf surged forward, recognizing what his mind couldn't quite believe. A life, new and fragile. "The goddess said," she said, "the seal was broken. That we would have heirs born of love." Sebastian's hands trembled as he cradled her face, then dropped to her stomach, feeling for that impossible flutter again. We're going to have a baby." Fresh tears streamed down her face. The barren girl is going to have a baby. Sebastian let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. He pulled her close, burying his face in her neck, his whole body shaking with the force of his emotion. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For fighting. For surviving. For loving me when I was unlovable. For giving me—" His voice broke completely. "For giving me a future worth living." They stayed like that, kneeling in the courtyard under the full moon, holding each other as new life stirred between them. The girl who'd been called worthless now carried the most precious thing in the kingdom. The king who'd been called cursed now held his salvation in his arms, and above them, unseen but felt, the moon goddess smiled. Because some stories don't end in tragedy. Some stories, broken and painful and impossible as they seem, end in hope, in healing, in love that rewrites fate itself. Epilogue. They named her Luna, after the moon that had blessed her, after the title that had transformed her mother from slave to queen. And when Susan held her for the first time, looking down at the impossible lily uncle in her arms, she thought about the girl she'd once been, the girl who'd believed she was worthless, who'd thought her life was over the night her father sold her, who'd stood at these gates, terrified and alone, certain she was walking toward her death. That girl would never have believed this ending. But maybe, Susan thought, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. That was the point. The best stories, the truest stories, are the ones you never see coming. The ones that take your broken pieces and forge them into something stronger. The ones that whisper, even in your darkest moments. You are not the end of your story. You are just the beginning. And Susan's beginning led her here. To a kingdom rebuilt on mercy instead of fear. To a mate who chose love over power. To a daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, treasured. To a life that proved, beyond any doubt, that the girl they called worthless was priceless all along. The end.